So how many people here are musicians? How many people want to be musicians? All right, Guitar Center store on Sunset Boulevard. It's the flagship store, largest one in the nation. Okay. So who was it that asked for simple? One word. Okay. All right. First thing I wanted to do is just thank everybody for the opportunity to be here. I got an email about a month ago from Mark, who talked about Graziadio School of Management. I'm certainly familiar with the name. And then he mentioned Harvey Capella was going to be speaking here, and I know Harvey from past times, so I said yes. And so it surprised Mark, because I happened to be at my computer at that very moment and responded immediately to him. In this day and age, I don't know if you get emails back fast, but lots of times those of us in business with 1,000 emails a day don't respond that fast. So the opportunity to come and spend some time with Harvey, and for those of you who saw Harvey earlier, I've actually had the opportunity to do some things with him in the past. And he is a legend. And his focus right now on the Center for CIO Leadership and trying to help this profession, I think, is very admirable. And I really appreciate what he gives us and the opportunity to be on here with him. When talking with Mark, I said, okay, so what do you want to talk about now? What's the theme of all this? And of course, it's about how do we move from the informational world into the innovative aspects of this. But he said, you can talk about anything. In fact, you should probably just share some stories. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share some stories of some things I've done over this very career, things that were innovative in their own right in terms of technologies and so forth. But along the way, I started getting this feeling about IT. And in that, we talk about bits and bytes and processes and all this other stuff, right? But there's people involved. And as an IT leader, it's an incredibly complex job. And so I want to focus a little bit on the people side of this. It's a little bit of a softer conversation. And we're going to go from there. So, answer this question. Anybody want to try?
You could change it to why are you crazy in this position?
Because you've been in it. When I hire somebody into IT, I traditionally will take the time to explain to them the company, explain what the company's been, where it's going, the IT department, what its strategies are, what the job role is, why that job role now exists. And then I want to turn it over to them. I want them to explain to me their career, starting from the back to the front, and explaining, briefly. Now, it's interesting what my definition of briefly is and traditionally what candidates' definition of briefly is. Those of you who are going to interview, be brief, succinct. But I ask them this because this is an absurd profession in my mind. We are asked to do the impossible. We're being asked to do it with less and less, constantly. The measures of success in IT are completely upside down and backwards. Here's one of the biggest measures of success. Nobody calls my help desk. That would be the biggest measure. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. They don't bother to call up and go, hey, thanks, I got to run today. Right? Systems have to be up and running all the time. Applications have to be implemented quickly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The demands of the role are amazing. So one of the other aspects about being a CIO that I've always found interesting is when somebody says to me, what do you do? Take a cocktail party. You're at a cocktail party and you're having a chat with somebody, and then when that conversation comes up. And I have started to dread that question. And I think some people sense why. It's like being a doctor at a cocktail party. As soon as you say, well, I work in IT, oh man, which computer should I buy? I don't think I get a new computer. What applications are you going to run on? Oh, I'm just going to do my checkbook. Use your checkbook. If you want a Mac, buy a Mac, okay? But don't ask me for justification for yourself, okay? The other aspect of this, well, I just lost my point on something. The other point of that is that they call you the computer guy, right? I once worked at Koo Koo Roo, which most of you, does anybody here know who Koo Koo Roo is? Okay, awesome. They're dwindling, unfortunately. I worked there. The chairman was a gentleman named Ken Berg, who made a fortune in real estate and couldn't retire. Saw this great chicken restaurant one day on the way to the Academy Awards and decided he wanted to buy the place, eventually did, and was going to grow it and be a competitor to Boston Market. Unfortunately, we ran into some snags along the way. We had a gentleman named Lee Iacocca on our board. So Lee was in the offices one day, and I was being introduced to him, and he said, "Hey, this is Robert. He's the VP of IT, our CIO." And he goes, "Oh, you're the computer guy." "Oh, you're the car guy." Okay, so I gather from the humor and the laughter here that you all understand what I'm talking about. This profession is infinitely more complex than what people summarize it to, right? And it's a challenge, an incredible challenge. And one of the challenges in my mind is not the technology anymore. I actually think this profession is 90% psychology and 10% technology. If you listen to some of the conversation that we've had earlier today, we were talking mostly about how to deal with business requirements, how to run projects, how to get funding, how to put in governance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Very little did we talk about a particular hard drive, modem speeds, cellular, all this other stuff, right? The CIO profession, the IT profession, in my mind, is one that focuses mostly on organizational psychology. Now, I've learned this over the years, and I've decided to be successful, I had to learn more about it. Now, I'm not telling you to all go take a ton of psychology classes, but if you still got opportunity, you might want to do that, okay? Challenge with it is people don't always cooperate either, right? And I think in the CIO's toolbox and skill set, you've got to learn a lot of skills in how to deal with this sort of thing. One of the other things that I found, though, is that it's really all common sense. You don't need a lot of classes in this subject. Okay? The trick is to sense what's common. And I would have you all consider that you too are human beings. I'll contemplate that for a second. That you have reasons you're motivated, you have fears, you have reasons why you don't tell everybody the full story. For example, when you're asking these are the business requirements, why they don't tell them. You have reasons why you describe all the exceptions and all the reasons why something can't be done. Now the funny thing is that our business users in this business, their identity is tied up in those exceptions. Their reasons for being in an organization is because of those exceptions. Something that Harvey was speaking about earlier, in the way I said he sort of hit on part of my theme, is that you've got to learn to manage that. In some ways you can wrestle with it really hard, but there's a trick to wrestling. And the trick to wrestling is that if you're standing there with your component and he happens to be leaning right, you were thinking you were going to throw him left, but he's leaning right, push him. In other words, what Harvey said was play into that. Make them feel that they are an exception. Make them feel important. But the great thing about sensing what's common, though, is that you, as you're listening to those conversations, can say, okay, I see what the real requirement is here. And you can then help, leave them off with that acceptance thing. But your job is to go and find out the commonality. Okay? All right. The other common thing is that everybody's got feelings. Maybe I see a couple chuckles. I think some people think, no, I know somebody who doesn't. We all have feelings. When you're managing and motivating, remember this organizational psychology thing, when you're managing and motivating your IT staff, your vendors, and your business users, and your customers, right? Remember they have feelings, and so do you. So tapping into those feelings and figuring out what's in front of you and what you have to address, you know. It's inherently inside you. Ultimately, where I'm trying to go with this is that we're confronted with a ton of business challenges, and there's a ton of experience that's already spoken today. There's a tremendous amount of resource here in this particular facility and around the world, right? But eventually, you got to assimilate all that, and you just got to start being the CIO, being the leader in this situation. And it really is easy, because yes, you're going to run your memory bank sometime and go, what about this, what about that? But what do you feel in that moment? One of the things that cracks me up is when I sit there in a board meeting and we turn around, and we're doing it right now as we plan on 2012, and the number I'm going to give you is fictitious now, but we say, let's raise comp, we're going to raise comp by 6% next year. And you say, okay, and I personally now chuckle and go, How are you going to do that? Right? So the answer is really simple. You start coming up with strategies. Start saying, here's our business strategy. Here's the pillars and the things we're going to attack. Right? Of course, after strategies, you start coming up with very specific initiatives. And after you go through the initiatives, you start breaking it further and further down. We even get to the point where performance reviews, we actually try to take an individual's performance review and tie them to those goals and so forth, right? But ultimately, that comp is going to come about, and the technologies and the innovations are all going to come about because people felt like it. Because they wanted to do it. And I think the task of us in this leadership role is to create an environment in which people can feel that. Now, in the earlier presentations today, there's been a lot of deep dive on the very specific things about the personality types. So we've had Myers-Briggs and we've had DISC. We've got ways to look at all this. But think about yourselves as you're leading your organizations and you're trying to move them forward and implement projects and produce business results. Right? You're going to find out that so much of this is in you. I'm encouraging you to just puff up your chest and go, I can do this. I've got a tremendous amount of background now. I've got a tremendous amount of education. And anything that I confront, I'm probably pretty familiar with. I'll look at a person and go, you're resisting this conversation. You go, why? Why would I be resisting this conversation? Another thing that we talked about quite a bit about in creating this environment is vision. And I'm going to share a few sort of, I don't know, call them Robertisms or something that I've thought of along the way. But at one point I realized that vision is a measurement tool. And we also brought up the old adage that you cannot manage what you're not measuring. We talked about inspiring people and creating an environment for innovation, that you give them a vision. Tell them broadly where you're going. Tell them why we're going there. Isn't that what you want to know? Isn't that what would get you up off the couch and start moving along? Right? Now, why do I say it's a measurement tool? Well, let's go through a crude diagram here. Let's sort of assume that's just time. Right? There's another part of the school that I'm sure could argue this out a little bit. And then let's assume that the button, when I press it, right, will work. There we go. And that's the breadth of issues that are facing us right now. Okay? Well, the thing about vision is that without it, that's where you're going to go. You're just going to meander off. People are going to be asked, they're all going to want to inspire. Everybody's going to try to do something, but they're just going to meander off. Because they have no way to measure their accomplishments. No way, you know, let's think of one of the most fundamental things we learned when we were children is that we wanted to please. And we wanted to get praised. Right? But they're off here on how they're going to get pleased and how they're going to get praised. They don't know. So, by putting that little red dot out there, which is vision in this particular case, looking out in the future and seeing that, there's almost a natural triangularization that can take place here. People on their own will then start to realize, generally, that, hey, I'm sort of going astray of it, and then they recorrect themselves. How many of you here like to be micromanaged? How many of you here like to be constantly corrected? How many of you here like the idea that if you're given a broad context, you can measure yourself towards that and keep marching along? How many of you feel that you're empowered and that you're learning in this process because you're smart enough to have caught that you were starting to lose this, right? And pull back in. This also, by the way, isn't a one-time thing. Because if you're an IT leader, what you're trying to do is build up an organization that is doing this repeatedly. We discussed earlier today, too, the need for constant repetition of this. Innovation is constant. There was one company in there that, on that one list that was provided that's been there for 100 years in the Dow, and that happens to be GE, constant innovation. So by doing this, the individuals in your team, individuals in your company are left feeling that they've learned something and they're feeling that they can contribute. And this helps to create the environment you're looking for innovation. Okay, a few other little stories here along the way. My favorite one here is exception versus the rule. When I was at Nestle one time, we were doing an SAP implementation. We, by the way, I had implemented, one of the only people in the United States that ever implemented SAP on the mainframe, the R2 version. And then I implemented the second ever US implementation of R3 in the United States. And the guy beat us by 2 days. Still hurts. We then went on to start doing a project that was 60% of a $9.6 billion business. So we were addressing that large of a scope. And as we went out this project, we had a number of consultants on this team and so forth. And we'd gone off and started to evangelize that we were doing this system, and we were going through the business requirements process. We went to our AP guy, and he had already made it pretty well known that he was going to have a challenge. He was going to be a challenge for us. So my consulting team that was doing the business requirements had done a pretty good job on their own everywhere else, but this one I felt I needed to go pay a little extra attention to. So I sat in the meeting when he described the AP process. And after about 15, 20 minutes of this conversation, I finally said to him, I said, okay, with all due respect, but let me ask this now. So you get invoices coming in, right? They happen to come into their mailroom, you then log them, and then you send them out to the various departments, they code them, right? They return them back to AP, you keep balances by vendor, you get your total balance, you determine when you're gonna pay them, you exercise terms, all that other stuff, right? And you write a check, right? Yeah. Okay, so with all due respect, what's so different about that than the half dozen other businesses just 3 blocks down the street here? And he said to me, well, we print checks at the factories. Okay. Getting back to the theme here earlier about sense what's common sense, and also the exception thing. This guy's identity was tied up in being unique. But my job was not to find all those uniquenesses. My job was to try to find the business requirements for this brand new massive system we were doing. The analogy I have for this is that when talking with our users, hopefully we're confronting them, when talking with our users and we're going through this business requirement phase, they are going to throw at you a pile of leaves. Every one of those leaves is an exception. And every one of those exceptions further identifies why they're in that business. And talk about the change management aspect. If you challenge that too much, you're going to have a challenge on your hand. But our job is to keep listening through that conversation and to try to find the trunk of the tree, to try to find the branches, try to find the broken branches. Because the other thing they're going to do is they're going to tell you constantly what their old system was. Those of you who haven't had a lot of practice in this, you're going to find that your users can rebuild their old system over and over and over again. You want to find the people that are starting to look new, and you actually want to be one of the people that helps them with that. So what you've got to do is respect that pile of leaves, but you've got to dig through that conversation, find the trunk of that tree, find the branches, and then go put those leaves back on for them so that they finally get their identities back in it. In change management, you address every one of those leaves. You talk to the people about it. You say, hey, I got it. Yeah, that's interesting. You know, come on, in one way, leaves are beautiful, right? But the big thing that you're focused on in the world of trying to move a project along is to try to come up with that trunk of the tree and so forth. Of course, innovation is there a better trunk? Is there better branches? Do we need so many leaves? Ultimately, that's what we're trying to get rid of. So this gentleman was quite the challenge there. That's where I get back to the idea of wrestling also, though. Is that in this case, when he made it pretty well known to us how he needed to be spoken to, he needed to be treated as inspection, he was very clear about that. It's exactly what we did. Instead of trying to argue with him, we did it. I walked out of that meeting with our consultants and they said, wow, that's not going to be that difficult. I said, I know, but here's your task. Your task is every step along the way to tell them, wow, this is a challenge. We're working on this. Thanks for the challenge. We're going after it. We'll do the best we can. Oh, we're getting there. Oh, man, we're almost there. This is a challenge, blah, blah, blah. Have we met your challenge? The fact of putting a printer in a factory and having the special cards that you had to have and locking them away with keys, right, so that you could do laser printing and checks, it was not that hard. But the trick is that this guy became away from a dissenter and became a huge advocate because we'd addressed one of his exceptions. Along the way, I've also developed a different philosophy about what a system is. Now, traditionally, we talk about people, processes, and technology. But I think it needs a little bit more refinement. And again, this is personal opinion. So if you're getting your final on this, you know, it's not in the book. Anybody, you know, before there were Cuisinarts and all, there used to be these things that they'd show on TV that was You could put a potato in it, and it had these wires, and you pushed it down, and it gave you French fries. Or you could change it different directions and get different sliced fries. It's sort of what a Cuisinart does now. I use this daily, and use it just like that. When having a conversation in business, I constantly parse it up through these features here. This is a bit of a hierarchy or a cycle. Actually, you'll see it's a cycle. And it starts with people again. We can't get away from it. You know, we can try to keep thinking about hard drives all day and storage and networks and all that stuff, but ultimately this whole thing's going to come back to people. People make policies. The danger of those policies when you're trying to work through systems and try to do new designs are those policies explicit or are they implied? I'll give you an example of that in a minute. To execute on those policies, you need procedures. Procedures are the actual steps that we go through for that. And in the course of those procedures, we need tools. Now, I remember early in my career when people used to come to me and say, the system's broke. And I'd get very annoyed about it, very defensive IT guy. No, it's not. And I couldn't figure out why I was trying to tell them that all the time or what I was actually trying to say. This helped me to finally get there. The system, as they're thinking of it, is the hardware, it's the software, it's the network. That's really just a tool. Let's go back to chicken, Koo Koo Roo, all right? When you're going to cook a chicken, right? People said, we're going to cook chicken. We got a policy of how we're going to do this. Here's the procedure. It's the recipe, right? And here's how you cook it, right? You need an oven. You need gas. You need a spatula, rotisserie. By the way, Koo Koo Roo chicken actually is cooked for 3 days by itself in a whole brine thing. So when they put it on the grill, they're just charring it for you. I learned that from our chef. Right? But most importantly, what I keep finding missing is training. And this is why I said it's a cycle, because you actually end up training those people. So, when somebody comes to me now and says, the system's broke, I don't argue anymore. I go, yep, you're right. Pretty interesting when a CEO comes to me, like he did the other day, actually says, the system's broke. I go, yep, you're right. But let's talk about where it's broke. Is it the hardware, is it the software, is it the network? Or is it that somebody's not doing the procedure right? Those of you who are really practitioners, you know how many times have you had a data-driven problem, right? Somebody put the wrong data in. Now, of course, you're going to go back and say, check your edit screens, all that other stuff, but nevertheless, that happens. What about the policies? How many times have we been confronted with this? Like somebody's just basically executing on the wrong policy. Is it the right people? But more importantly, are they trained? Let me give you an example. When I was at Elisa Studio Electronics, I came in the door there as a consulting CIO, and I was immediately confronted with this situation where everybody claimed that this ERP system that they had, or MRP system, manufacturing system, wasn't working, it was broken. And so I started going around and talking to all the various business constituents and asking them what were their requirements and what were the challenges. I then went back to the developers who had actually developed the system, it was in-house written, and said, hey, what does this system do? We had a Saturday business meeting a few weeks later, and most of the people involved in this were there, and it was my turn to speak, and I said, hey, guess what? You're getting a new ERP system. They were excited, because that's what they wanted, right? I put up slides that showed, hey, in each of your areas, like say demand planning, here are your requirements. Here's what the new system will do. Manufacturing, here's your requirements. Here's what the new system will do. Then I showed them the name of the new system. It was their old system. They hadn't been trained. They hadn't been forced into training. Well, I'll say forced, but hadn't been sponsored into training. Forced. You can see a little bit of in the trenches fighting is coming out of me here. That was the whole faux pas. They were ready to throw out a multi-million dollars of investment in writing their own MRP system, which, by the way, did a phenomenal job for them. It's an engineering company, by the way, so that's why they wrote their own, right? When all they needed was training. That's all they needed. Another example of this in action was at the same company. It was a small company. 1 month we had $7 million in potential sales, in orders. But the last day, we left $500,000 on the dock. Now, $500,000 out of $7 million is a huge chunk of change for a small company that's really on the edge at that point. So I'm sitting in my office, and our EVP of operations, essentially the general manager, is livid when he found this out, starts running around trying to get information as to why it happened. He runs down to the distribution center and they tell him the system's broken. Of course, he buys into it just like that. Comes running up and talks to the CFO, who I reported to at the time, and she says, well, go talk to Robert because he just gave me this whole assessment of all of our systems the other day. He comes into my office, just spitting fire, right? And I proceeded to walk him through this process, essentially. I said, let me tell you what the problem is. You've got a distribution center where sales orders are coming in during the day. They're sending them on down through the normal system, but then the salesmen are getting on the phone, they're calling down to the warehouse really fast. I need this now, I need this now, I need this now. And it's become the rule, not the exception. Right? The other challenge of that is that the warehouse then, one time, 1 month, when it was getting very late in the night, and the month was very close, is making the numbers, one of the executives told them, ship the highest, most expensive items. Now in that business, you could see these big boxes, they had 88 key keyboards, you know there was a good gross margin on those, you ship those. But somehow that policy, while that 1 month it was explained as explicit, was now thought to be implied all the time. So when I went down and started talking to these guys, they were saying, hey, we need a new report. We need the pick list updated. We need dollar amount of all the items on there. And I said, what? I have never seen dollar amount on a pick list before. What are you talking about? Your job is to move boxes. So when he was explaining the problem here and the frustration, I said, here's what we've got to do. We've got to change 2 policies. First off, orders entered today, ship tomorrow. Secondly, the shipping company or shipping department, when they run a pick list, they start from top to bottom, they finish it, and they move on. By the way, these guys did not feel motivated. They were very frustrated because they felt like they weren't getting done. Their pick list at that point were Swiss cheese. They were constantly confused. They never felt a sense of accomplishment. In fact, when we put those policies in and I went down to the warehouse along with our EVP and stood there and explained to them, okay guys, you're not paid, to think, you're paid to move boxes, he cringed. Now fortunately, I developed enough relatedness with these guys. I'd spoken with them, I'd spent time with them, I got to know their problems, I got to know who they are, and I got to be able to speak to them in a language that meant something to them. And they loved the comment. So this is what we did. Orders that were put in today, shipped tomorrow. The shipping department then the next morning would turn around and run a report. It would say, here's what you got to pick. Now we did change something. We realized that the trucks, you had FedEx, you had UPS, all these people had different delivery times. So the report now sorted that direction. So they could go pull all the stuff for the first guy, they're done, they move on. They were ecstatic. They were able to say, hey, we're actually getting something done. For the next 3 months were the 3 most profitable months of that company's lifetime. Unfortunately, there were bigger issues. They didn't stay that way all the time. They ultimately went into bankruptcy. They're still actually around now, but it's a much smaller company. But this is an example of where this thought process laid over the problems that were being presented and helped me to figure out how this goes. I offer this up to you as something to consider, and feel free to talk about it more if you want later. One of the other thoughts I've had is called influencing the results instead of reviewing the results. When I was at Virgin Megastores, and I just started, and the first thing I heard was this constant complaint that the stores didn't have access to any pertinent information. Let me explain a little bit about Virgin Megastores. It's a record store. Sold DVDs, and then later on we got into books, games, and fashion. In the music industry and the DVD industry, for those of you who saw Eric earlier, we would have as many as 400 titles every Tuesday to add to our mix. Right? Here's the interesting thing. In music, the first 2 weeks are absolutely critical. They actually equal, on average, 50% of the lifetime sales of a title. Now, if you know much about retail, the worst thing in retail is to be out of stock. So I immediately interpreted that we needed to have real-time based systems here. There's no way that you could be looking at a report a week later and so forth, right? So I was putting together this whole presentation of this data warehouse we'd done a pilot, we're going to store managers conference, and I was trying to come up with a summary slide. And all of a sudden this dawned on me. And I said, hey, if I can start giving you real-time information, aren't you in the position to start influencing the results instead of just reviewing the results? And there's a bigger concept here. Oftentimes we build systems, and especially reporting systems, that go up to analysts, They go up to the CEO, the other executives of the company, who, with all due respect, sit there and rub their chin, ponder, think about something, they develop some bigger policy and so forth. It takes a while to ever action that information. One of the things that I'm sure you've been taught in classes or you deal with day in, day out is the idea that information should be actionable. So when we did our data warehouse, it was a data-driven warehouse, so we launched launched it in phases by data. So we loaded traffic data in first, so we had counters over each of the doors that counted people going in and out. It was a very simplistic pilot. It helped everybody to get their heads around what multidimensional reporting was going to be. We then came along with POS data. That information actually was launched out to the field on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving in 2004. I actually had the next day off. My inbox was flooded with thank yous from the stores. A week later, we ran some statistical reports to take a look. Actually, by the way, I'd been cheating and looking all along because remember, it was a real-time system. But a week later, we sat down and did our normal weekly comparative and realized that the KPIs, which we had focused them now on 5 key performance indicators per store, every single store, 25 of them, and every single KPI went up. And they were supposed to go up. Every single one. In fact, in 2009, when we were winding down Virgin Mega Stores, just before I turned that system off, and trust me, none of you really want to be turning down your data centers. It's sort of bittersweet. Just before that, I ran a report and looked at those stores and proved that the metrics for every one of those stores had continued to stay above that waterline at just prior to Thanksgiving 2004. Every one of them. And the reason why is because the data that came out of that system was put in the hands of the people who could influence those results, not just review them. Even to the end, our CEO barely could use the system. Didn't need to, other people were using it like mad. The stores literally kept reports up and running all day long. They could see what was the fastest selling title that day. We started putting exception alerts in that said, look, if you start exceeding 50% of your sales or your available inventory on that first day, hurry up, place another purchase order because it can get back in before the weekend, which will then be the next big sales rush. Remember, 50% of the lifetime sales value. I look at this now and I find many times in designs of systems where we start to disassociate the reports with and the people who can do anything about it. So I want to encourage you as you look at system designs and so in the future is realize this adage about you cannot manage what you're not measuring doesn't apply just at the executive level. Remember what I said about it's all common sense, what's common? The guy that's in the warehouse, the guy that's a salesman on a sales floor, the store manager, they all want to achieve. They all want to participate. They all want to do good. They all want to be praised. And they needed information. They're the ones who needed it, and they're the ones who turned the results around. So, with some of these thoughts and some of the stuff I shared earlier about common sense and vision and so forth, this is me on a soapbox a little bit, but I really want to encourage you as you take on your roles of IT leaders or continue those, to really start to realize you got a ton of education, you've got a ton of smarts, right? But it isn't about going through your memory banks and always playing that back. It's about being the leader in this area. I was watching golf this weekend. I'm a huge Tiger Woods fan, golf fan, and I met him once before in Las Vegas. I'm beginning of winter now. And there was an announcer who was talking about Tiger, and he'd been working on his swing so much, right? And he made this comment, which is a brilliant comment. He says, he just needs to stop thinking about the swing and just start playing golf. So it ties back to what I was saying earlier about this is all common sense, what's common. It's inside you. When I was at Virgin, we used to have these things called Lunchbox Heroes. And we'd have artists come in. We'd get to see Maroon 5, King, Taylor Swift, when he was 16 years old, who you already knew was going to be a star, and so forth. And one of the biggest ones of those, the highest draw we ever had, was Tommy Chong. He laughed over here and I got a frown here. It's pretty good, right? He'd written a book, and he was going to come in and talk about it. And in the course of being in prison, he learned a lot of things. He found God. And what he finally got to, though, was this phenomenal testimonial where he started saying that all that crap you're looking for out there, and remember, this guy was looking for his life in joints, okay? I don't mean bar joints. He said it's inside you. And I just want to encourage you to realize that in this profession, what it takes is, we talk about the new CIO, the one that's going to lead people and start to be participants in the business, is to just relax into it and realize you have so much going for you, and that it's just really common sense. So it's just a comment to try to make you think a little bit. That's all I have. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes, back there.
I have an observation. Early on you mentioned about you go to a cocktail party and they say, what do you do? And what I found is that most people say, I work for a guitar center, or what do you do there?
Yeah.
IT people say, I'm in the IT, oh, and I work for the guitar center. So I think you put yourself in the box, you understand?
Well, actually, I answered that question saying I work at Guitar Center. And especially when I worked at Virgin, because it's a well-known, it's the 8th most powerful brand name in the world. That's what I used to say. Then when people would press, I go, okay, I work in IT.
Are there different training issues regionally? So when you implement your corporate-wide training program, are there different areas that learn differently?
Yes, absolutely. It always will depend on the type of application you're doing and what type of challenges it has for the organization. Guitar Center, just a little bit of background on it. We have, as of last week, we have 221 stores in 43 states around the country. Anywhere from our flagship store, which is on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, down to much smaller stores, like we have this one that's only about 5,000 square feet up in Stevenson's Ranch, or in Pueblo, Colorado, same things. So we have people dispersed all over the nation. We have a tremendous amount of new systems going into Guitar Center. We run basically our POS, I like to say in the cloud, but you can argue with me profusely about my definition here. It's, there are no servers in the store. It all goes through a browser and goes back to our service at the home office. We have web-based applications that actually allow them to do custom orders and so forth. So we've been implementing a new Dayforce, or labor management system, implemented a new task management system, and we're in the piloting right now a clienteling system that'll roll out January. We've thrown a tremendous amount of change at them in the last year alone. We have a leadership organization, or a training organization. There are what are called RLTs, regional leader, or training leaders, RTLs, excuse me. And they do have a national sort of play that they call, and then they go into each of their particular regions, and we'll customize a little bit to it depending on what the needs of it is. Yes?
Please help us better understand some of the behavioral or cultural issues that you've encountered at Guitar Center when implementing any type of system.
Okay, so there was a fun little call out earlier about how fast you move sometimes with systems and the planning and so forth. Guitar Center has been in a very aggressive mode the past couple of years. Guitar Center is a very dynamic and demanding environment. Again, we've been catching up on a lot of systems and starting to move that into really more and more into the innovative side. So the challenges we have from a system thing are literally capacity. Literally are. We have so many wonderful ideas that come from everywhere. And that's one of the things I like to emphasize about innovation also. It comes from anywhere. Like, if you create an environment, it can come from a clerk. It can come from a passing comment. That's the thing about innovation is I was doing an interview once. I was interviewed by Dan Farber from CNET, and he was asking me when I was at Virgin, like, do you have a department of innovation? I go, no. It's in the culture. It's the thing. Guitar Center has a ton of this going on. We are very aggressively, or have been very aggressively, implementing multi-channel. It's a concept where we're bringing our web channel together with our store channel. You can go online, guitarcenter.com now. You can find all of our used products, our vintage products, all of our brand new products. Right? You can find out what store they're in. If you happen to be jonesing for P-Days, right? So if there's another one you want, here's what you should do. Go on to guitarcenter.com. You'll find it. For all you know, it's going to be in our Boston store. But you can go ahead and put your order together, order your case, your strap, they may come from the warehouse, it all gets combined together, and then it goes ahead and gets shipped to a local store if that's what you want, or to your house.
No, not my house. Maybe my neighbor or the store, but not my house.
Now you know why we do it this way. That's happened fast. There's just a ton of change going on in our environment. So it's culturally, the thing for the vision for everybody is to know that what we've been doing is now consolidating these divisions together to help us get some organizational alignment. I think the culture knows about all this aggression. They know that we went private in 2007. We were once out public, but we went private. And our CEO didn't do it just to avoid the economic challenges that we had. It was a brilliant timing. What he did was he realized we were so overextended in our growth pattern that we needed to stop and retrench and get ourselves together. So we have actually been on a very aggressive path, even during the economic challenges, about implementing new systems. And like I said, you can just hear some of what we just did in the last year.
Do they have plans to go public anytime soon?
I can't answer that. Yes.
As a CIO, what keeps you up at night?
Websites that don't want to stay up. Actually, right now, the challenges I face the most are we are in a major transformation. We were once very divisionally oriented. It was formerly, I forgot to mention that to everybody, formerly the divisional CIO for Guitar Center. So we had the Musician's Friend division, which had Musician's Friend, Woodwind and Brasswind, a number of other website brands under the Music 123. And then we had the Guitar Center division, which I was the divisional CIO for, and then we have another division called Music and Arts, which is mostly on the East Coast. We are now, as of January this year, pulling those together into more of an enterprise view and going to a brand orientation. So my role now is the Senior Vice President over Application Services, so I've got responsibility for this entire breadth of situations. So what's keeping me up at night right now is getting our outsourcing stabilized, getting more comfortable with who my business teams are. Literally right now, my task for when I go back tomorrow is to set up some more business meetings with my new sets of users that I haven't, or executives that I haven't had a lot of relatedness with. And then just trying to get ready for holiday right now. And there was a comment here earlier about bandwidth. And I've been through that very cycle. You try to go back through and say, how efficient are we being? You chastise them for misuse. Who here uses projectplaylist.com? Well, our stores do. We're streaming down all this stuff. So that's our biggest challenge right now as we go into holidays, that we've thrown so many applications at this, and despite what we planned in capacity planning, which probably was so-so, we've got ourselves in a little bit of a hole there right now. So we're really working on the bandwidth situation. Yes?
With the demand of IT consumerization, what has been your biggest challenge?
That's an interesting one. When I was at Version, I was pretty leading to bleeding edge because it was a culture that was much more accepting of that. Guitar Center is a little bit more, we're bringing up a lot of legacy systems and focused on a couple other strategic areas. We implemented our thin client rollout last year. It's the first project I did when I got there. And we now have, where we used to have only about 4 terminals per store that had any internet access, we now have on average 24. And that has empowered the store associates substantially. So if we ever do a custom order for you, it was a web-based app. They used to have to queue up in one of the 2 terminals that was out on the floor. Now they can go forward with this. So, sorry, I sort of lost track of the question a little bit.
IT consumerization.
Right, so we made a huge investment in that. So here's this world of mobile. And traditionally, I would have been the first guy jumping on the mobile platform. But I actually have an interesting question for you to contemplate. And I've been asking some of the analysts about this, and I'm not getting a very clean answer back. What does mobile get you? Because when I go to the CEO and CFO and say, let's go spend a bunch of money on mobile, the first question is, okay, what's the ROI? Right? Now, I can probably save some time in labor cycles, right? But am I really increasing sales? And the challenge with mobility in the retail space right now is you're not raising sales that much, which makes it very difficult to pay for it there. And what you're likely doing is just protecting your channel shifting going on. So as far as us goes, the consumerization, as far as bringing that technology into our store environment, it's been very, very slow. On December 1st or thereabouts, I will be kicking off our store task force. We have an R&D budget set aside for next year, and we'll be looking at it. I personally am very interested in it, but I keep looking for the use case that's better than just saying mobile POS. With 24 terminals in our stores, you know, it's not like you go up just to the front counter, you could go anywhere. We're not sure that we really need it for that case. What we're thinking about is the sales cycle. We are a commission-based sales environment, so putting in self-service kiosks, like I did at Virgin, where I had 150 in one store, hey, that's not going to fly in our environment. But the idea maybe having an iPad that helps you pull up a really cool guitar, go through the custom building features, all those sorts of things might be good. The idea of having better understanding of where the inventory is in the back room so that you can maybe summon somebody back there to go get it and bring it out instead of going back yourself and then losing the sale with the bag goes, why am I spending this much money and walks out? I say that because I did it once. That's actually one of my favorite stories too, is when we interviewed at Guitar Center, I was asked by our CEO at the time, he's now our CEO. He said to me, so why do you want to come to Guitar Center? I said, well, I've been a customer for over 25 years and I want some of my discretionary income back. So I know where you're coming from there. Thank you, everyone.